Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first official episode of the Film Feast Watches. This series in particular is all about 007. That's right, I'm watching every single James Bond movie ever in chronological order, most of which I've never seen before, and even the ones that I have seen, I have a fuzzy to straight up non-existent memory of. But now I'm fixing all of that, and I'm watching all of them. That's going to be one less thing that I have to worry about when it comes to social interactions, talking to people about movies. Yeah, I've seen every single James Bond movie. What do you want to know? You want to know the scene from X Bond movie? You want to know what X Bond girl's name was? Yeah, I know all that. Maybe. In this first episode, I'm going to be talking about the early Connery years, namely the first 4 films he did for the franchise. That includes Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and Thunderball. So without further ado, let's jump into Dr. No. First things first, I had zero expectations going into these earlier films. I didn't want to give myself any preconceived notions about how they would be shot, how they would be edited, how they would be acted, and I knew that they would be a little rough around the edges in terms of special effects just because of the time, but again, I just didn't want to lead myself into anything specific. But one thing I did expect to see was that iconic early era Bond opening. How did it go again? Oh wait, no, that's Cowboy Bebop. It actually goes like... But instead, what I got was... Right after that, we get the opening title sequence, which we all know has become one of the most stylish elements of the Bond movies to date. However, what we get here is kind of weird. It's just like silhouettes of people dancing with one another to like a ramba. Move to that to a 3 blind mice thing. I can't really explain it. It's very weird. It's a very weird opening, but it isn't without meaning. We quickly find out that these 3 blind men are actually assassins who kind of kick off the inciting incident in Dr. No by killing a British intelligence station chief by the name of Strangeways in Jamaica. James Bond is then summoned to Jamaica to investigate, as well as work with the CIA to determine if this is connected with a plot to radio disrupt manned space flights. Obviously, I have to talk about the man himself. Literally from the first moment that Sean Connery is on screen as James Bond, his screen presence is tangible. It jumps off the screen.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Mr. Bond, I suppose you wouldn't care to, raise the limit?
I have no objections.
It was the perfect mixture of everything, from that opening line, to the music, to the atmosphere, the casino and everything, the beautiful woman sitting across from him. Everything just clicked perfectly. From the very first moment that Bond arrives in Jamaica, he knows that he's being followed. He knows that something's up, and he is incredibly resourceful with dealing with all of this. Even just arriving in his hotel room, he knows exactly what to do. He knows all the tricks to ensure that if someone does enter his hotel room while he's out, he knows about it. The way the plot is laid out is very carefully done, and the way the story is told is in a way that it doesn't go over the audience's head. And that's a good thing, because this being an early era spy film, it's important that every key plot point be clear and crisp. But unfortunately for someone like me who has been a little spoiled by the pulpy, explosive, bombastic action flicks of the last 10 years, Dr. No is a little skeletal and dull. I also had a lot of problems with the editing, which varied from choppy to just plain stunted. And then there are the Bond girls, who... I'm not even going to say it for this segment. I'm going to end up repeating myself in later movies down the line, but for now I'll just say that they're useless. I don't really know what I was expecting, and I know I said I had very few expectations going into the series, but seeing Ursula Andress walking out onto that beach, which is such an iconic image with the knife on her side, and, you know, even though, yeah, she's wearing a bikini, I thought, hey, she's going to be useful, but she's not. There's a lot of, James, no, help me, stay by my side.
Quiet.
Well, something's biting my foot.
I mean, I've been conditioning myself for the last 3-4 years to ask more out of female empowerment in movies and, you know, really try and strive for a better female representation in movies. And I mean, that was just bad. But despite the uselessness of Honey Rider's character, I actually really enjoyed the sequence on the island. That collection of scenes was very good at tension building. Bond is essentially on the doorstep of cracking this case wide open, and while traversing this island, there's talk of this dragon, this fire-breathing dragon. It's kind of silly, but it also works at the same time because Quarrel is burned alive by the thing, and it's kind of intense. But when the action should continue rising, it just doesn't. It slumps, in fact. And yeah, Dr. No does have an interesting reveal where you find out his motives and his plans, and it is nefarious, but it still doesn't build to anything. Bond is imprisoned, and, you know, the stakes are risen in that scene, but again, it doesn't feel like the stakes are rising. And this all culminates in the final battle in the control center where Dr. No is about to disrupt an American manned space launch. But it just doesn't work. It all feels very slapped together, like, hey, they're fighting now, and oh, Dr. No is dead now. That's it. This is kind of going back to how I said Dr. No is very skeletal. It's a movie that understands basic story structure and understands what it means to, you know, build the action and make a climax and then have the falling action. It doesn't understand how to utilize it in a very dynamic way. There's plenty of conflict, just no aim or focus to it. So that's how I felt about Dr. No. It's a strong debut for the character of James Bond, and the first 2/3 are well directed by Terrence Young. Other than that, I just felt like it was a very lackluster spy film, but that is probably due to me being a little spoiled. Moving right along to From Russia with Love. Cards out on the table, this is my favorite Bond movie to date. From Russia with Love is very much so a streamlined Bond experience. It's not too busy, it's not too action-packed, but at the same time it's also not dull. The characters are memorable, the story details are fairly digestible, and it's not incredibly misogynistic. It's still pretty bad, but I think it tempers it somewhat. Terrence Young returns to direct this film, and while he's definitely dealing with a lot more story elements, it all fits together fairly well, and he doesn't have to do much with the material. It kind of writes itself. The plot of From Russia with Love is pretty complex, but here goes. Spectre wants revenge on Bond after the death of Dr. No. They plan an elaborate scheme to have the beautiful Tatiana Romanova steal a cryptographic device known as the Lecter from the Soviet embassy in Istanbul, Turkey. Romanova, unknowingly working for the evil masterminds, complies after she is told she must employ Bond to assist her in this operation. This will allow Spectre the opportunity to bring 007 in close enough so that they can exact their vengeance. Romanova makes contact with James only to fall in love with him at first sight and slip further into Spectre's deceit. Admittedly, this film does have a somewhat weak first act. Terrence Young uses this downtime in the first half of the movie to set up very memorable characters who have very clearly defined wants and needs that fit in with the storyline, and that helps to just make a much more believable world. Playing against Bond is a much more fully formed Spectre, which was mentioned in the previous movie, Dr. No being a chief agent among the group, but now we are seeing a more formidable alliance against Bond and the rest of the world. Obviously, there's the iconic imagery of the shadowy head of the organization sitting in the chair, petting the cat. It's a very good way to set up a villain. The main villain I want to focus on in From Russia with Love is Donald Red Grant, who, from the moment he appears on screen, you know that this guy is a daunting, formidable foe. I want to especially highlight the scene on the Orient Express, which is just one of many great set pieces in this movie. But it is the first scene that we actually see the two characters, Grant and Bond, meet one another and slowly peel back each other's layers to figure out that they are their enemies. The brawl that they have in the train car may be one of the best fight scenes I have ever seen. just because for its time it is incredibly intense and none of the punches look pulled and it takes place in such a small space. I'm just like, how did these actors do this? Well, they're actors, Sam. They can do anything. I didn't really need to use the comb. I already have a mustache. All in all, I think From Russia with Love is the best Bond experience that a person can have. It's Connery's best representation of the character, and for the most part, it's a great story. It felt like a spy movie across the board. Moving on to Goldfinger. I'm gonna breeze by this movie for the most part because I feel like my opinion's going to be disagreed with by a majority of Bond fans, because Bond fans love this movie. It has been touted as one of the penultimate Bond movies, but for me, it just doesn't entirely work.
Banks don't open on Sunday.
This is the first 007 film directed by Guy Hamilton, and he will pop back up in a few years to direct more Bond films, but you can just tell from the opening moments that he wants to infuse a very different kind of action and spy movie into this franchise. The opening scene alone touts a change of pace. It's faster, more sleek, and that tux? Come on. This is a new kind of Bond movie. Goldfinger shows off an entirely different side of Bond, and while these are definitely characteristics that we've seen in the character in the 2 prior movies, they are like upped to 11, which shows off the character in a very different light. Let's take one of the film's early scenes for example. Bond, having just destroyed a drug lab in Latin America, follows an exotic dancer to her dressing room. He's about to do what Bond does until he sees in the reflection of her eyeball a henchman sneaking up on him. So what does he do? He grabs the woman, lets her take the hit as a human shield, which is the first time I've seen it happen in the series, and it is utterly surreal. Obviously, I've seen Austin Powers, and in The Spy Who Shagged Me, it is parodied to an immense degree. I will always remember that scene just because of how much my dad laughed at it whenever we would watch it together, and it has just been burned into my brain to such a degree that when I finally see Bond use a woman as a human shield, it's it's kind of funny. It's shameful, but it's funny.
Shocking.
I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but what I'm trying to get at is that Bond is a dick in this movie. And mainly he's shown as imperfect, but what it comes off to me is that he's just horrible.
Man talk.
Bond's deplorable actions as both an agent and a human being with morals comes to a head in the scene where he basically rapes pussy galore. Now, I know this is going to be a hot point for some Bond fans as well as men's rights activists. I don't really care about the second one, but for the Bond fans, I want to make this video series for you. But he straight up rapes her in that scene. I mean, I know she kind of gives in, but for a good little portion of that scene, I was extremely uncomfortable and also uncomfortable afterwards.
I must have appealed to her maternal instincts.
You mean you raped her? If you want to disagree with me, that's fine. I understand. I know that the way films were made back then and the way that writers kind of thought of this stuff was completely different, and I understand. I don't respect that, but I understand. Quickly moving on from that, Goldfinger as a movie is very overblown. It's the most Bond movie of them all because it just has tons of action, tons of plot points, tons of side characters, and all of them are very interesting in their own way, and they are also iconic. Oddjob, for example. That character is one of a kind. As far as henchmen go, that guy is in a league of his own. Goldfinger himself is a larger-than-life villain, and to a certain degree, I can't really take him seriously. But of course, he trumps so many villains that we see in movies nowadays who are just pitiful in comparison. He actually has a plan. What his motivations behind his plan were exactly, I couldn't really tell you because at one point I just lost interest in him.
Banks don't open on Sunday.
And I lost interest the very moment that he let Bond live instead of cutting him in half with the laser. I mean, I know the movie wouldn't exist if Bond died, and so many other movies wouldn't exist if Bond died, but I just didn't understand his motivations from that point forward. I have a lot of respect for what Guy Hamilton was trying to do in the final action sequence. Throughout this whole movie, he was just turning the action up, and it was, for the most part, very well received. But that end sequence just kind of came off cluttered and overblown to me. Admittedly, it does use tension very well, the stakes are very high, and it sets the bar high for future Bond movies to come. I acknowledge the positive points about Goldfinger, and I think that they outweigh the negative points. But at the same time, I feel like this is an abundant abuse of power. The way that Bond needs to be perceived needs to be fixed, as far as I'm concerned. We need to view this character as a hero, and while yes, he should be shown off as imperfect, and he should have plenty of flaws, none of them should be rape. After finishing Goldfinger, I thought to myself, the writers of these movies need to do better.
Banks don't open on Sunday.
And they do. They end up getting a good bit better. Do they do any better in Thunderball? Kind of. In a way. Not really. Thunderball is many things, but first and foremost, it is Terrence Young's third and final film in the Bond franchise. And you can kind of tell because he seems to want something different out of this movie than what the studio wanted. He wanted a classy spy movie that was filled with intrigue, but the studio just wanted another derivative action film. And the two work together well, equally, but not necessarily in harmony. I'll try and explain that as I talk about the movie further, but I'll just say this right now. Thunderball is a movie that I appreciate more than I actually like. Jumping right into it, Thunderball has a lot of cool stuff that I love. Sharks! Harpoon guns! Cute in a Hawaiian shirt. That underwater aesthetic made it feel so new and fresh, like a completely different Bond film. This is also a very multi-layered film. Lots of events happening in this movie. Everything from the clinic scenes in the very early parts of the movie all the way up to the final underwater and boat sequences. This is a very long movie. It's the longest Bond film up to this point in the franchise. And you can kind of tell how Terrence Young wanted something different from the studio from the opening sequence alone. James Bond attends the funeral of a SPECTRE agent who incidentally has the same initials as him, but the man is actually alive and disguised as his own widow. Bond and he have a little bit of a tussle, and then he escapes from the funeral in a jetpack. And it's just as silly as it sounds. And I've seen this scene before. I knew it was coming. I just didn't know in what context it would be. I thought it would be a little bit more silly, but no, it's in the middle of an awesome opening action sequence, and I'm sure audiences back then got a kick out of that, but for me it was definitely weird. Definitely didn't fit. Thunderball does recover though, and it moves along at a solid, steady pace, and we are given information, and it is doled out quite liberally, and it is not just clumped on us all at once. I do think it takes a little too long to get to its inciting incident, which involves a man surgically switching his face with a pilot in order to fly a plane that has an atomic bomb on it. This man was contracted to do this job by SPECTRE, whose presence was really missed in Goldfinger, and having them so in the forefront of this movie, with the main villain being the number 2 of SPECTRE, Emilio Varga, was especially awesome. And in my opinion, up to this point in the franchise, Emilio Varga was the best well-rounded villain. My biggest complaint is the character of Domino, whose inclusion just feels so clunky. She is the sister of the guy who was supposed to fly the atomic bomber, but now here she is in the literal arms of SPECTRE's number 2, and it just leads me to wonder, why is SPECTRE so foolish as to get so close to the blood relative of one of their patsies? I don't know, maybe I'm just cherry picking for plot holes. You can address me in the comments if you'd like. But moving on to my least favorite part of this movie, and I think Thunderball completely face plants with the ending. Oh my god. With like 30 minutes left, we're already getting into the final action sequence, which is a giant underwater battle between the CIA and SPECTRE guys, and it is like 10 minutes of non-stop fighting underwater. No dialogue, just vague grunts, bubbles, and maybe like a harpoon jab into somebody. That's it. It seemed like the editors were so bored with this footage that they eventually just started cutting to sea life. Bond manages to make it onto Emilio Varga's ship. They fight. Domino actually ends up being the one who kills him with a harpoon gun, which is the best part of the ending. And then they jump off the boat and the boat explodes. And that's the end. That's it. And so Thunderball ends like a fart in the wind. And so does this video. That is it for the first official episode of the Film Feast Watches, and this has been the Film Feast Watches 007, the early Connery years. I will be back soon with my next episode, which focuses on Connery's last two films, as well as the only George Lazenby film on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Don't forget to subscribe if you like this channel's content, and if you want to engage with me about these films, which I am definitely encouraging, you can talk to me in the comments below. I have also done little mini blurb reviews about each of these movies, and I will link to those in the D box. Those are on my Letterboxd account, and if you want to engage with me on those reviews individually, you're more than welcome. All you have to do is get a Letterboxd account, which you should have already because it's awesome. And then, of course, there's the Film Feast's Facebook page as well as my Twitter account. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been awesome. I'm going to try and make the next episode better and shorter. I know this has been a very long episode, and I appreciate you guys for watching. So that's it. I'm gonna go to sleep, and then maybe watch another Bond film, and then edit this video for like 1 billion hours. That's my estimation, 1 billion. See you guys next time.